been talking about the situation in Iran. And if you haven't heard, about 10 days ago, a young woman named Mahsa Amini was arrested by the morality police for not properly covering her hair, and then she died in their custody. Ever since then, Iranians have been pouring into the streets demanding justice for her death and freedom for Iran's women. Now, so far, the government has answered the protesters with brutal violence and has shown no signs of reconsidering the law that requires women to cover their hair. In fact, last week, the president of Iran was scheduled to be interviewed by CNN's Christiane Amanpour in New York. And at the last minute, he demanded that she wear a headscarf for the interview, even though the interview was in New York. And when she refused, he straight up just canceled the interview and left. Just left her looking like she was giving therapy to a ghost. So joining me now to talk about the interview and the situation in Iran is Christiane Amanpour. Christiane, welcome to the Daily Show. Let's jump straight into it. You have interviewed many Iranian presidents. You have never been in a situation like this before, where they demanded of you that you wear the headscarf not in Iran. Walk me through the situation and also why you chose to not do what the president of Iran requested.
Well, very briefly, with my team, we wanted to do this interview and we were going to get the Iranian president's first and exclusive interview on American soil. And as you know, because New Yorkers know, it's gridlock at the UN. This is the UN week. And one of the things we like to do is get voices from all over the world, including the Iranian president. So I've done this now for many years, and I've always had the first interview with the latest Iranian president, and it's never been an issue. There is no law in the United States that requires a journalist to wear a scarf for any interview. And it was never an issue. And by the way, I find out that this guy, he had a breakfast, he had a press conference, and he didn't require anybody to wear a scarf. So, come to the evening and it's now 8 o'clock and then they say he's praying and he's resting and, we're going to do it a little bit later. And suddenly an aide came and said, the president would like you to wear a scarf. Mm-hmm. I'm like, why? No, I don't have to wear a scarf. Anyway, cut to the chase. It is not law. And as a journalist, I made instantaneously a journalistic decision based on the principle that A, it wasn't law, and B, you don't get, strong-armed by a foreign government or any government when you're trying to sit and conduct a previously arranged interview.
It seems like, and I can't help thinking that this was most probably, I guess, in some way, shape, or form, motivated by the timing. You are of Iranian descent. Do you think that there was an element of him not wanting to appear on camera with you for fear of a message it may send to a country that's very quickly turning against this dictator?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I do actually believe that he did not want to be seen with a woman whose head was uncovered, right at the same time that in his own country, there was an uprising on the streets. And in fact, a young woman had died because of this, while in the custody of the morality police. And I will just say that this morality police has been around since, 40 plus years of the Islamic Revolution. But under some presidents, it's less obvious and less strict, and under some, it's much more strict. So this particular president is one of the very hard-line variety, and he basically came to power by making the crackdown on all sorts of social norms, including on women's dress and their activity. That was a central theme of his campaign, and clearly it's all gone, as we say, pear-shaped, because I don't think he expected that something like this would cause the worst uprising in Iran since 2009. It's really interesting, and your audience should know, and your viewers, that some 80% of the Iranian people are under the age of 21. 60% of Iranian students and university graduates are women. Women have a lot of power, and they want their full rights.
The Correspondent is the world's most successful member-funded ad-free news site. They started in 2013 in the Netherlands. They have 60,000 members who pay 70 euros a year because they believe in the kind of journalism that The Correspondent does. No ads, no corporate sponsors, no billionaires, no clickbait, no tracking you around the web the way Facebook does, no targeting you with data, and no 24-hour news cycle, because the Correspondent is deeply reported journalism about events under the surface froth that preoccupies most of the online media. And they have a rule. No reporting about problems unless you also report about what we can do about it, what you can do about it, what we as a society can do about it. So they've been successful in the Netherlands. Then now they want to move from Dutch language to English language publishing. I'm helping them do that. You can help them do that by going to thecorrespondent.com and reading about their principles and signing up to be a member.
One of the most significant principles of the Correspondent that distinguishes it from other journalism is that it won't take any money from advertisers,
right,
like Taco Bell, which makes delicious tacos, by the way.
Yeah. Well, no ads.
What impact do you think that will have on reporting the news?
No ads is huge. If you don't have ads, you don't need daily traffic quotas. If you don't have to have daily traffic quotas, you don't have to report the same stories that everybody else has because they're clicking on them. And you can cultivate a kind of calm in your news site that differs from the rest of the web. And this is a big principle of the Correspondent, is that it's not trying to just grab your attention all the time. It assumes that you will grant your attention to something because they're not selling your attention to a third party. And that's why membership, direct support between journalists and the people who think it's important, is so key.
What do you think the press could be doing better in their coverage of President Trump?
I have 3 suggestions. One is, don't let him be your assignment editor. Don't chase every tweet. And remember that access to something that's fundamentally misinforming in the first place is not really worth anything.
When you want to have access, and you have a president who's reading everything you're writing and everything you're tweeting, you have to be very careful about how you frame things, or there's a good chance you're not going to get access, frankly.
Yeah, but that's something I find strange about American journalism, for the most part. Like, I live in a country where you didn't have access. That's just how it worked. You know, I've lived in countries around the world where it's like, you don't have, access is not what journalists have. Access, find the things that are not given to you with access, because access, in my opinion, often comes with misinformation. I mean, you know, American journalists, they've had access to so many things. They had access to the lies about Vietnam. That was the access. So I wonder sometimes, like, why are American journalists so obsessed with access when that access could be misinformation? It should be journalism, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a quid pro quo that comes with access, right? And that is either you're going to slide something nice about me in your next article or your next column, you're going to quote me, or you're, you know, it's I scratch your back, you scratch my back, I get some interesting breaking news, and then you get to feed off of that for a while. You know, what you're seeing right now, right, are the pundits have gone away. No one wants to hear from the pundits. They're wrong, they're a mess, who cares,
Right.
failed congressmen on TV, we don't need them. You know what they're doing? TV news organizations are camped out, talking to the head of elections in Maricopa County, right? Like,
Right.
that is journalism.
Yes.
That is reporting. That is not access, someone calling you up, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. It's just doing the work. And I would argue most journalists are not access journalists. They're not going to write a book about their time at the White House.
Right.
They're not going to tell you funny stories about hanging out with John Boehner. They go every day and go into communities and try to figure out what the accurate story is. And sometimes they get it right. Sometimes mistakes are made. And I think most journalists do a really good job. But when you're going for access, I do think it's kind of screws up your perspective. And yeah, you don't need access to do good reporting. You really don't.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because it feels like when people talk about the media, what we often mean, especially in America, is cable news. I mean, for the most part, you know, because you are completely correct. If you read your news, you find there's amazing journalists who break most of the stories that inform how we even see the world. But when it comes to cable news, pundits seem to be more important than facts. Like, you know, you just bring people on. You're just going to be like, I'm just going to bring on this one person to say why Latinos like Trump. And then I'm going to bring on another person to say why Latinos don't like Trump. Now you guys fight. Thank you for tuning into the news. That's a great formula for creating conflict for the screen. But it doesn't really inform people. It's just people's opinions and pundits just trying to guess something. And then, by the way, if they get it wrong, there's no ramification. They can just be like, oh yeah, this is why I was wrong. It's not because of me. It's because the information didn't match what I was saying.
Yeah, And also, I think the important piece you're missing is it's cheap. It's cheap. You pay all those people. They are on every show. They rotate through. You've seen the 9-person set, right? It doesn't cost any money. You know what's expensive? Going into the field with a crew for the next 3 days and shooting and doing interviews and then writing your story and bringing it back and editing your story. That costs a lot of money. And actually, you can hire a guy or two for that same cost, right? And they'll be on your set for the next year. That contributor contract is for every show that they want to be on over the next year. It's a sunk cost. It's very easy, and it costs you no money. Yeah, and then you also have this built-in sense of urgency and sense of drama that I think everybody feels every story needs, that actually takes some work when you're going to do it in a tape spot. So I truly believe a big factor in that is just cost, is just money.
When I first worked in campaigns, we used to footnote our commercials because we were so concerned about being called out for not telling the truth.
Interesting.
But what has changed over time is that as each side basically just tries to get out their own voters rather than trying to persuade others, they care less about whether they're called out by the media on telling the truth or not.
It's interesting you say that, because I've noticed on the news shows, you'll be talking to politicians, and back in the day, it felt like a politician was so afraid to contradict themselves, to be a hypocrite, to have any moment where there was a discrepancy. And now it feels like just having the platform to come on your news show and say something is more important than whether or not you will,
and what they love, often you'll have someone come on and you can show, and it can be footnoted, you can go to the dictionary, you can go to 8,000 reference books and say, you're just not telling the truth. And they say, well, you're lying. And they don't care, because to the group of voters they're trying to appeal to, calling us out, whether we're right or wrong, works for them.
So do you ever get to a point where as a news organization you say, we can't have certain people
right
on?
now, I mean, I will not put anybody on my show who will not accept the results of the last election. Just they don't come on.
Wow.
You have new issues coming up all the time. I had an interview with a senator a few weeks back, which I still can't believe. And remember how when Hillary Clinton had her emails that were classified, how Trump said, lock her up. Republicans wanted investigation after investigation. This senator would not even say that Trump having all of those documents in his house was wrong. 4 questions, 4 times, would not say it was wrong.
So you're in an interesting position. For a long time, America had an agreed idea of what was happening on the news, for the most part.
Supposed to, yeah.
Right. Cable news came, and then it became, really partisan. You could have it this way, and you could have it that way, and your facts could almost be a la carte now. You still occupy a position,
Trying to, yes.
Yeah, but you still occupy this position where most people think of it as, okay, this is the middle, but the Overton window of middle is shifting. How do you now respond? Do you try, and do you have to cater to some of these politicians?
Here's what you don't do. I mean, I think there is a risk when you're talking to certain politicians if you're willing to say what you're saying is not true. And sometimes you have to risk looking partisan by doing that. But I think we can't bow to that threat. I mean, as long as I'm confident when I am that we're arguing about facts, undisputable facts, I have no problem saying you're not telling the truth, even if that's going to cause somebody to say, oh, you're just being a political hack. You have to do that. That's what we have to stand up for as journalists, right and wrong, fact, not fiction.
When you look at the rhetoric of a Trump campaign or a Trump rally, you see President Trump out there talking about the fake news, and he points at the back of the room and the crowd boos. And a lot of people will say like, oh, this is just, a little bit of it's a wrestling show. He's just playing the heel and it's all fun and games. And then you had an incident of violence against a newsroom. You had journalists who were gunned down, and people said, well, this is part of the environment that Trump is encouraging. Do you feel that in some way Donald Trump is encouraging people to have a hateful relationship with the media?
I don't connect the president at all with what happened at the Capitol Gazette in Annapolis. That was a horror, and it was completely, I would believe someone mentally deranged who went after that organization. So I don't think it's fair to blame him for that. But I do think that he has very deliberately set up the press as the enemy of the people. I don't feel that I am the enemy of the people, and it's not benign. I mean, this is a, this is something that we first heard from Joseph Stalin. This is very dangerous. It undercuts democracy. And for years and years, I've covered the State Department, where we try to teach and help advocate with new democracies how to train journalists and how we do journalism. Secretaries of State travel all over the world and deliberately, until more recently, deliberately go to Beijing, go to Turkey, go to Moscow, have press conferences, even if the host country will not, to show dictators that this is what the First Amendment means. It's very, very important. It is our value system. And I do think that by talking about fake news is what Russia did to our election. The propaganda that we see from Russia, invading our social media, to say nothing of the hacking, but that's fake news. Propaganda is fake news, not what my colleagues at the White House and covering other beats in Washington do every day, sometimes around the world at great peril to their lives.
This is one of those stories that genuinely hit me so hard, because it feels like you have lived through some of the most seminal moments in American history, and you were also reporting on it. You worked for 50 years in this business. What do you think was the biggest change that you saw in your time in journalism as the first African-American woman working at the Washington Post?
I think the biggest change was after the urban uprisings of the 60s, when the Kerner Commission, which was a commission that was named by the president, said the media had in many ways contributed to the fact that the urban riots occurred. And that was because they had not integrated their reporting and the editing staffs. And in many ways, they said they were just showing us America only through white eyes. So I started at the Post in 1961. When I went back in 1972, it was a little different because there were more reporters of color, more females, but still it was very white male dominated.
You came into this world at a time when it was just something that did not happen. You walked into a newsroom where there were only 2 other reporters who were black. You were the first African-American woman in this space. And reading in the book, there's one of just the most harrowing passages where they had a policy of not reporting when black people were murdered. One editor even called those cheap deaths that shouldn't be reported. How do you even begin to work in that kind of environment? And did you help the editors understand why it was crucial to report all news?
I tried to help them. And I think the way I began working in that environment is because Dr. Martin Luther King was beginning to say to young black people, go into white corporations and excel. So I felt like I was almost part of the freedom movement by going and becoming the first African-American woman at the Washington Post. I didn't think I was a trailblazer at that point. I just was doing a job that I loved. I had 4 years in the black press, and the black press has been very important in America. Both in terms of reporting on civil rights, but in going places where white reporters wouldn't go, where white newspapers wouldn't go. So that experience also helped to prepare me for my work at the Washington Post. One of the first stories that I remember a lot was when I went to the University of Mississippi as part of the team from the Post to cover the integration of Ole Miss. And that was the most horrendous thing you can imagine, because Mississippi was one of those places where it was a lynching state. It was the heart of segregation, and the university was like this bastion of white supremacy. So it was chaotic on the campus. But what hurt in addition was that I had no place that I could get a room because they didn't have hotels for black people. So I slept in a black funeral home. And
in a funeral home?
Yeah. I slept with the dead, Trevor.
This is so insane that you have lived through that time. I'm honestly fascinated to know, in that time when this was happening, were you optimistic? Did you think that you would see America change? Or was the resistance to integration so strong that you thought it would last forever?
The integration was so strong that I never thought I would see a black president.
Wow.
That was a huge step forward in many ways. But of course, with America, it can be liberal and then it can swing to conservatism, and you see what we have now.
I see what we have now. I do indeed. You reported on so many stories, and your inclusion in the newsroom was powerful because it really felt like, when you read the book, you lived through two of really the most important eras in American history, in modern history, definitely. And that was women's movement for equal rights and black people's movements for civil rights. Which of the two did you feel like had more momentum when you were in them? Did you feel like, oh, this is going to happen or this one won't? Or did it feel like both were just moving forward?
It felt that the freedom riders and the freedom, I call the whole civil rights movement, the freedom movement.
Yes.
It felt like it was going to open doors for so many other people.
Right.
Because after the civil rights movement, after the Black Power era, that's when Gloria Steinem wrote her article that said, after Black Power, women power.
Right.
And so after the women power, it's the blacks who were the pioneering minority. And so after women power, then you had the oppression against gay people being really looked at and studied and acknowledged. Then you had the oppression against the disabled. So it's many ways, it's the black movement, I think, that was the most important movement, because all people all over the world were singing "We Shall Overcome." And, you know, in China and all around the world, people who had been oppressed were saying, if that happened in America, you know, why can't it happen here?
It's so powerful when you speak about how when you first got to the Post, your mission was not to be a reporter that focused on black issues, but just a reporter who excelled. You didn't want to be pigeonholed as a black reporter. But then you came to realize that it was crucial for you to take up that mantle and report on black issues. Why do you think it's so important for mainstream media to look more like actual America and not just have the voice of predominantly white men?
Yeah, it's because you can't really talk about a community that you don't in some way represent, that you don't in some way know, that you don't in some way have more than a stereotyped notion of what it's all about. And because with white supremacy in America, that whole narrative has also been accompanied by an anti-black narrative.
Right.
And very often, and that's been since the beginning. This is 2019. We African Americans or black people have been in America 400 years. We were here a year before the Mayflower, but you know, 2.5 centuries of that was the era of slavery.
Right.
And then at the era of Jim Crow. So, or segregation in the South.
Yes.
Yeah. So the whole feeling that this is this whole anti-black narrative that has been a part of the DNA almost of America, as much as white supremacy, that has not really been acknowledged. It's been kind of glossed over, and you pay attention to how, you know, the violence that violence gets.
Yes.
But in terms of what motivated and a lot of it is about poverty. You know, poverty is very violent. And as you were saying in the segment with the billionaires, you know, it's very real what's happening in this country. And it's been happening for a while.
50 years of writing, 50 years of finding ways to report stories even in spaces where you weren't allowed. I mean, one of the most shocking and I find funny at the same time stories was when you talked about how when you and yourself and colleagues would go to marches, you would have to disguise yourselves because you couldn't be journalists in public as black people. You would dress up as clergy, you dress up as priests and so forth, and nuns, and you would hide typewriters under your clothing, which I didn't even know how they fit. But when you look at America today, how do you find that balance for yourself of both where America has come from and where America still needs to go?
Okay, first I should say that those reporters who had wrapped their old royal typewriters in old clothes
Right.
when they went to the South because they didn't want the white sheriffs to arrest them.
Wow.
And so they would also disguise themselves as ministers, and they'd carry Bibles under their arms. And so that was a way of trying to get to the story and knowing that they couldn't go as reporters. But where I see things today, I think it's a time when media is more important than ever. It was very difficult when the president started talking about fake news. It was very difficult because, you know, those of us who came up in the legacy media, we knew about all of the issues of ethics that we had to adhere to in order to be hired by the Washington Post and in order to work there. We knew that we didn't take gifts from anybody. We knew that we had to always pay our own way. We knew that we had studied in colleges and universities. And so to have our whole process dismissed as fake news was not only detrimental to the U.S., but it was detrimental internationally because whatever we say about the faults of America, it still has been the bastion of democracy. And so when you have something as crucial, you know, as freedom of the press
Right.
being denigrated by the top official of the land, it has a very destabilizing effect in the whole world.
I could genuinely talk to you for hours, but luckily I have the book to keep me company. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's an honor meeting you. Thank you so much. Trailblazer is available now. A truly fascinating story. Dorothy Butler Gilliam, everybody.